Madam President, it's time for the Senate and the U.S. Department of Education to get serious about the student loan crisis in America. It is a crisis in Illinois. It is a crisis in Iowa, in Nevada. You pick the state. Student loan debt is now a larger debt in the United States than credit card debt. Add up all the debt that Americans owe on credit and debit cards, it doesn't reach the number of the student loan debt carried by students and their families. More than 44 million Americans have student loan debt. The total amount is $1.5 trillion. As I mentioned, larger than the cumulative credit card debt of America, second only to the mortgages that we own on our homes across the United States. An American who graduated from college in 2015 with a 4-year degree owed an average of $30,100. That debt is often much higher for many Americans if they decide to go on to graduate school or if they are the unfortunate attendees at the for-profit colleges and universities. Across the United States, there are many of them. You should remember them. 9% of young people coming out of high school end up at for-profit colleges and universities, 9%. 33% of all the college students defaulting on student loans come out of the same schools, for-profit colleges. 9%, 33%. Why? Because they're so darned expensive, dramatically more expensive than community colleges or other universities. Second, they don't care if you finish. They just assume you didn't. And number three, if you finish, you get a worthless diploma and can't find a job. So there you are, stuck with your debt. But this is about student loans in general, not just the for-profit victims. I hear from students young and old who've had to forego home ownership and hold off starting a family because of their massive student debt. And increasingly, I've been hearing from parents and grandparents who, in a gesture of goodwill and kindness, co-sign the loans on behalf of that grandchild or child who was a student. And guess what? Grandma and mom is now trying to pay off that student loan debt because the student can't. Chairman Jerome Powell of the Federal Reserve earlier this year said this about the student debt crisis at the Federal Reserve. He said, absolutely could hold back economic growth in America. The student loan crisis. We need to take action on it. And we rarely even try. Today, I am going to try. Earlier this year in March, I tried to offer an amendment on the Senate floor here to help student borrowers. The Senate at that time had a bill up to provide regulatory relief breaks to banks. I thought it was only fair the Senate would also consider taking a look at the student debt crisis. I was blocked from getting a vote on my amendment. I'm not giving up. I'm filing an amendment today to the Financial Services and General Government bill that is part of this appropriation package pending on the floor of the Senate. My amendment deals with an important part of the student loan problem, the treatment of student loans in bankruptcy. If you borrow money for a house, lose your job, and have no money, you file bankruptcy and your mortgage is discharged. If you borrow money for a car and you can't pay off the car and you lose your job, you file for bankruptcy, your auto loan is discharged. How about a boat? Oh, buy a boat, take a loan, file for bankruptcy, it's discharged. But I'll tell you, there are only a handful of things you can borrow money for that you cannot discharge in bankruptcy, no matter how bad things get. And one of them is student loans. Currently, most types of debt can be discharged in bankruptcy, but not student loans. Up until 1976, all student loans were fully dischargeable in bankruptcy. But since then, the law has been changed, and if you have a student debt, you're going to carry it to the grave. You cannot discharge it in bankruptcy. In 1998, Congress determined that federal student loans would be non-dischargeable in bankruptcy unless the borrower could demonstrate that he or she faced an undue hardship. That's the quote, undue hardship. But we didn't define it. We left it up to the courts. That's a problem. Most students don't even try to pursue the undue hardship exception because of the difficulty and expense of meeting the standard of proving undue hardship in bankruptcy court. Listen to what the Wall Street Journal said last month. It found that only 473 student loan borrowers in the United States out of 44 million, 473 out of 44 million asked for relief from their student debt in bankruptcy in the year 2017. 473 out of 44 million. And the Journal found only 16 bankruptcy cases that year where a judge actually ruled on student loan debt. 16 cases out of 44 million borrowers. And in only 3 of those cases did the judge cancel the debt. What do you think your odds are taking your student loan debt to bankruptcy court when 3 out of 473 out of 44 million actually had their debt discharged? A big reason why the undue hardship path is difficult for student borrowers is because the Department of Education contracts out the collection of the debt to companies like Educational Credit Management Corporation. This is a student loan guarantee agency that collects on defaulted federal student loans. This company is notorious for aggressively challenging and appealing borrower claims of undue hardship in bankruptcy court because it doesn't want to see the loans discharged. So many students don't even try to fight them. They know they're going to lose. Here's what my amendment does. My amendment would bar the use of federal funds to pay contractors like the one I named to contest undue hardship claims in bankruptcy court when the claims are brought by specific categories of borrowers who face severe undue hardship. Let me tell you the categories I'm trying to protect: deeply in debt with student loans who are coming to court asking for relief from their student loans. You tell me whether you think these Americans deserve a break when they go to bankruptcy court on their student loans. The first category, veterans who've been deemed unemployable because of a service-connected disability. Number 2, family caregivers of a veteran or an elderly or disabled family member. Number 3, people who are receiving Social Security disability or whose only income is Social Security. And number 4, borrowers who finish school but have spent at least 5 years with an income of less than $24,000 a year. Those are the 4 categories. Wouldn't you agree that you'd start with groups just like this and say, give them a break? They've reached a point where a disabled veteran can't pay back this loan. Don't have these credit agencies hounding this poor fellow for the rest of his life. By stopping these federal loan guarantee agencies from contesting and litigating these undue hardship claims in bankruptcy court, we can at least give these hard-hit student borrowers a chance to seek an undue discharge from bankruptcy, undue hardship discharge in bankruptcy. My amendment also includes a provision preventing federal funds from being provided to a for-profit college if the college receives more than 85% of its revenue from federal sources, including the Departments of Veterans Affairs, GI Bill, and the Department of Defense tuition assistance funds. Currently, for-profit colleges are able to receive 90% of their revenue from federal sources, the most heavily subsidized private for-profit companies in America. The GI Bill, they can add in on top of it. They add insult to injury. It makes no sense. It incentivizes for-profit colleges to aggressively recruit veterans and service members to get extra money from the federal government and provide very little in return. Not only would this provision help protect students, it would result in long-term cost savings to the federal government. To my colleagues, I say this. I'll bet you've all given a speech on student loans at home, haven't we all? The people come in, these young people, burdened with debt, saying, I don't know what to do with myself. I can't pay off this debt. I can't even buy a car. I'm living in my parents' basement. I thought I was supposed to be a college graduate with a big life ahead of me. What are you going to do about it, Senator? Well, I wish there was something we can do. You get your chance today. There is something you can do, an amendment that I'm offering. This issue of student loan debt is challenging. Let's not run away from it. Let's face it honestly. Let's give at least these 4 groups, including disabled veterans and the caregivers who watch them, an opportunity to get their student loans discharged so they can get on with their lives. I'm going to keep at this and keep raising this issue until we get the positive change that these students and their families deserve. I yield.